I'll leave my video up, but put myself on mute when other people are talking. And it is time, so let's get started. Welcome to the JMAP session at IETF 109. Sadly not in Bangkok, which I'm very disappointed about because I was sick last time we were in Bangkok and did not get to enjoy the city as much as I would have liked to. Anyway, as always, all of the work we do here is under the note well. This is the same slide I used a year ago, so hopefully it is still accurate. I don't think anything's changed in that time. All the work you do here contributes to the IETF and is under all of the policies of the IETF, which I'm sure you have all read in great detail and will obey. Thank you very much. Moving along to our agenda, we have 1 hour to get everything done here. So we're going to be discussing first status of JMAP MDN, which is a little bit tricky because our area director is not here and that's waiting on him. Then discuss the 3 current work items that we have, talk about my JMAP blob spec, and then a discussion about JMAP for data portability. This came up in the CalConnect call. Europe is working on data portability requirements for a whole stack of services, and a lot of the data about people and personal information management is things that JMAP or JMAP adjacent work is building data formats for. So talking about whether some of the other formats for personal data should also have, I guess, something like a JS contact defined and then a JMAP way to access that data, which can hopefully become the standard interchange format for different services that provide that kind of data. All right. Moving on, I guess I'll talk to Barry at some later stage about the area director follow-up for MDN. I haven't seen any feedback that requires anything at this point, so I'll push straight ahead for now to JMAP calendars and to Neil's slides. This one.
Do I need to join the queue, or can people?
No, you can just speak.
Oh, cool. Okay. Right. So this is just an update on JMAP for calendars. The kind of JMAP equivalent to CalDAV for those that are new here. The current status is basically getting implementation experience now, and then making further refinements based on that. So some of the things. I've got a few questions I'd like to discuss on the next 2 slides about some things I've run into whilst implementing the current draft. So the first point is about adding invitations to a calendar. So if you receive an IMIP message via email and you want to add that into your calendar, it's fine if the calendar server itself is processing the IMIP message because it doesn't have to follow your normal permissions. But if some client that's completely external to your calendar is trying to do this via JMAP, normally the permissions would not necessarily let you add an event where you're not the owner, and you may not have the permission to update it either if you receive an update from the organizer, because it doesn't know that it's not really you that's updating it, it's you've received this and you're kind of passing it on to the calendar server. So I was just want to bring that up as, is this something we want to handle, or should it just be that you have to have the calendar server should integrate properly with your email and have some back channel for updating it? And if we do want to handle this, how should that happen, like without that really kind of making the whole permissions model pointless? Does anyone have any ideas or any comments, I guess?
What do CalDAV servers currently do?
That is a very good question. I'm not actually 100% sure. I need to check that again. I think they don't really enforce the permissions. I think permissions are always just kind of done in the clients to stop users from making changes that kind of are considered frowned upon, perhaps would be the way of putting it. But it's more gentleman's agreement than actual enforcement.
Yeah.
But yeah, yes, we should definitely double check that. And this is probably something, like all the Jamet calendar stuff to discuss at Cal Connect 2 the next time we meet there, but thought I'd bring that up as this is one of the issues I think needs to be resolved now for this. But if no one has comments on that, I can
if it's your personal copy of the event, you should be able to do pretty much what you want. That the permissions are there to stop you making mistakes rather than to stop you presenting the data to yourself in the way that you would like.
I guess that, yes, that's fine so long as then you need some way of adding the event while saying I do not claim ownership of it. So don't send out invitations and stuff for this, potentially. Which you could know just by looking at the reply to address, actually. Okay, I'll think about that more.
I still
so
like the model of the client having to say, I want to send invitations for this rather than having them be automatic.
Sure, but I think there's still a permissions thing of, generally we're moving away from letting the server just arbitrarily send invitations from any address without checking that the user owns that address.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, I'll think about that and we'll discuss it next Cal Connect perhaps. And so go on to the next slide. This has got a bunch of questions all related to scheduling again, of course, and this point, in this case, the participant identities. So this is about who you are in the calendar, essentially, like which email addresses, or it's not actually necessarily email addresses, because it could be different scheduling protocols, but which participants in an event should be considered as the user that's currently using the calendar. So at the moment, they are on the calendar as just a property on the calendar objects. But as we discussed at the last meeting, I think we're going to move those to be per account rather than per calendar, because we're going to allow an event to be in multiple calendars. And so it doesn't make sense that those calendars would have different sets of identities. And I think generally you're going to have different accounts where you have different sets of identities. So that should be fine. Once we do that, my first thought was then, should this be a data type rather than just a property on the accounts object? Which I think it probably should. So it's just, you can do a standard get and fetch them, and that makes it a lot easier if there's changes on the server. You use the standard push mechanisms and everything else to get the updates, rather than being stuck on the account capabilities object. The kind of more interesting question, if we make it a data type, is then should that be merged with the mail identity data type, which is a very related concept of the addresses I can send as over mail, or should it remain separate? So does anyone have any thoughts on that?
How different email from calendar identity is going to be? I mean, are they email-like thing? Are there any other properties in it? Is it like the plain one on it, or remind me?
So they have quite a few different properties. So the mail one, for example, has things like signature, the main thing is like the name, the friendly name and the email address. But then you have other things that are only going to be relevant for mail, like signatures and stuff. Whereas with calendars, the name and email thing are useful, but you also have, as I said, it's not necessarily an email address we're associating. It could be a different protocol that's being used for scheduling, and so it's more URI. This URI is representing this user, so that's kind of a separate property. So there's some overlap, but not complete overlap. Yeah.
Neil, a question. So why wouldn't we want participant identities on both the calendar and the principal or account or whatever?
No, we wouldn't. We'd take them off the calendar, and it would be its own data type that belong to the account, and there's one set of data type, a set of participant identities for the account that applies to all calendars in that account. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so how would we then implement something like the secretary mode, or however you might call it, where you define that somebody's acting on someone's behalf only for that calendar?
Well, so that calendar would come from a different account. This would only get problematic if that user wanted to share two different calendars in a single account, one in secretary mode and one with not in secretary mode. That wouldn't be possible under this system. So I don't think that's too bad a restriction. Like generally, you might have team calendars like that you're in, personal mode, not secretary mode. I can't remember what we called it. And those would be in an account that belonged to the group. And then my individual calendars, I might share with specific people, and those would be in secretary mode. But I wouldn't share one of my individual calendars and allow you to act as yourself on it, because that doesn't really make a lot of sense.
So this would mean if we have a couple of calendars and somebody sets the identities over CalDev, so to say, then we would need to look at the set of participant IDs on a calendar and then split them up for JMAP in different accounts, right?
Well, so I mean, this goes back to the question of whether an event should be allowed in multiple calendars, which has some nice properties and is more consistent. And that's what we were going to try doing. But if we do that, does that make compatibility with CalDev harder? Because obviously it's a different model, and so calendars within a single account have to have consistent identities and stuff.
The CalDev model that we're trying to use at the moment is one that's a draft spec that is not the same way that Apple's doing it. It was something that they proposed a while back, and then CalConnect went and rewrote. So I don't think there's anything in CalDev that's widely supported that allows for a set of participants per calendar at the moment. It's all per principal, and then the principal is the same for all the calendars in an account already. So
yeah, so in that case, there's probably not so much. Yeah. Sorry, Robert.
Yeah, so I think we're actually making it more like CalDev. Sorry, Robert.
Okay, so that's what Apple is doing then. It's splitting it up per principal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think
should it be its own separate object or not? I think one identity, regardless of the protocol, makes sense.
So what was that? Can you think it should be a data type?
Yeah, I think it should be data type, and just use the repurpose the existing mail identity for participants.
Okay, you think it should be the same object type?
Yeah, I don't see any reason to have a separate one.
Yep. Okay, I'll try that and see how it goes. So the other question I've posed on here, which I came to is, so when you're looking at an event and trying to decide if this is which participant, looking at the participants in the event and trying to decide if any of them correspond to the identity that you have, you're basically comparing two URIs. And I came to the issue of what case sensitivity should I be using for comparison. If I have a participant that's got a mail to URI, for example, which is mail to colon and an email address, and I have an identity with mail to colon email address, do I compare those case sensitively? But the scheme bit is not case sensitive, I don't think, and neither is necessarily the domain part of an email. So yes, any thoughts on what we should do there? We should probably define it anyway.
The main part is case insensitive, right?
The main part is case insensitive, sorry, yes. Whereas the mailbox part is potentially case sensitive, although in practice almost no one does. I think like 99% of the time, probably case insensitive, ASCII case insensitive is the right thing to do and will work. But I wonder if we want to mandate that, because that in theory could hit a problem if you had people using email addresses with case sensitive mailbox parts and conflicting ones at that. It seems unlikely, but I don't know. Any thoughts?
It's almost like a question for email core to maybe clarify and make a stronger argument, saying that if you ever do have a system where localhost, local parts are case sensitive, then you're in big troubles to begin with.
Yeah, I think you will be in big troubles these days. So much of the internet presumes that is case insensitive.
Well, a lot of web services just like uppercase my email address, like like Air Canada, and it's like, well, okay.
Yeah, that isn't not a bad idea. Maybe we should just put out some kind of, I don't know, best practice or some document saying, look, if you don't make this insensitive, you're in for a world of hurt. So just don't do that.
And then you cannot really compare URIs case insensitively. I think it has to be more nuanced than that, unless you're comparing the same schema, and then that the schema is case insensitive. So yeah, I can see that being tricky.
Yeah. I mean, most of the time it's going mail to schema at the moment, but I could definitely see potentially in the future different schemas.
Well, you cannot compare HTTP URIs case insensitively, right?
So you're saying you can or you can't?
You can't, because the path host name is case insensitive, but path is not. Yeah. So
yes. Yeah, I'm not sure what the best thing to do here is.
That would probably require quite a bit of text explaining this, or say you need to parse the scheme, and then if you know the scheme, then maybe you can compare case insensitive if you know it is insensitive, but and then give examples of both ways, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, the scheme is always case insensitive, right? That's...
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay, I think, just need to put a bunch more text around that then probably. Okay, those are the main things I wanted to bring up of issues that I've encountered so far with implementation. So I think we've got some paths forward on at least some of those, and I'll try and update the spec for next IETF and bring you up at next CalConnect. Anyone else got any other comments, questions, or anything on JMAP calendars while we're looking at this, or should we move on?
I think probably let's move on. That's
all right.
Our time. Next up is JS Contact.
Hello. So I'm just going to give a short update on JS Contact that I'm working on together with Mario, who is also in the meeting today. Hi, Mario. Next slide, please. So with JS Contact, we are doing basically for contacts and contacts what we are trying to do for calendar events with JS Calendar. There are two documents. The one is the specification of the data type. That's JS Contact and its version 02. And totally on me, there have been no changes since last IETF. I'm sorry about that. And there is another document which describes the conversion between JS Contact and vCard, which did get an update since last IETF, thankfully due to Mario. And it's mainly around the implementation status, where Mario has implemented more tool support for mapping between these data types. Mario, I don't know if you want to describe more here. If so, please just jump in. But basically, what this helps us with is Mario.
It's just a Java library which is that implements not only the conversion between the various card formats to JS content, but it also implements validation of JS content object and the creation of JS content object based on builders. So it is a library that, according to my opinion, covers all the aspects about creation, maintenance of JS content objects.
Cool. And if I remember correctly, during the mapping, it has turned out that we are covering, I think, almost everything or even everything of the available vCard properties in JS Contact. Is that right? Or I'm not up to date on this. If we missed any, if there are known missing points, so to say.
I tested the library against all the card, VCard, Xcard, or JCard objects I found on the web. Especially for JCard, I tested the library against the responses coming from the Rdif servers listed in the IANA Bootstrap registry for Rdif. So I tested more than 1,000 responses, including JCard. But obviously, if anyone can provide a counterexample that is not covered by the current implementation is welcome, so it can be improved. I don't know if there are other examples existing on the web, but if anyone has a particular example that is not covered, I would be happy to test the library against those examples.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm also going to look into if I find a couple of more files to test this with. In either case, I think it will provide a strong foundation, or however we might, and I guess we will change the core format still. This will be a good way to make sure that that nothing gets dropped while doing so. Having said that, I guess then what remains is that the probably weak points of vCard are still, I guess, some of them are dragged into JS Contact currently. Namely, that's the address parts, which in vCard were very driven by a Western, by addresses that are used in the Western world, and also there, I guess, more in the large countries. So I guess the address part will be the biggest will be the biggest thing to get right in JS Contact if we really want to add something on top of vCard. Yeah, so that probably brings us to the next slide, the next and the last slide, which is basically that I will now work on updating the core spec. It expires next month anyway, so I guess I really should do that now. And along with that, we'll need more implementations. I will work on looking if and when we support that in the Cyrus IMAP server, for example. but I guess I can't give an estimate on that one yet. Probably I'll work on it on a feature branch just to make sure I get implementation feedback early on. Yeah, that's it from my side. I'm not sure if there are any questions or input at this point. I guess otherwise we are done with the presentation.
Yeah, my memory of the biggest challenge with vCard was dealing with groups. The idea that you could group related fields together with a prefix dot in vCard.
Yes, I wonder. I mean, yes. I'm not sure if we even have groups at the moment in scope at JS Contact. But let me check that. Yeah, we have already JS Card group, but it's really just a very thin wrapper. Yes. Okay. Yep. Yeah. So we'll definitely also need to look into that then.
Cool. Thank you. Anyone else have anything to say about this, or should we move on to the next document? All right, so next one was Civ, which is here, Ken.
All right, hello everybody. Hopefully the slides are more coherent than I feel at 3 a.m., but we'll grind through here. So there's been a couple iterations of the draft since we adopted it in IETF 108. A lot of that churn has been based on implementation experience in Cyrus and how we intend to use this at Fastmail. So covering the main changes in the account capabilities object, we've specified that the Civ capability strings are case insensitive. Also added a max size script capability. And one other thing that I forgot to put in the slide was there's also a Boolean property which specifies whether the implementation supports the test method, which I'll get to in a further slide. As far as the Civ script object goes, we've made the name property optional when using the set method. If it's not set by the client, then the server will assign its own unique name. This allows for blind creations where the client may not want to do an extra round trip to see what's available before it goes ahead and creates a new script. Additionally, the isActive property is now set on the server via a new argument in the set method, which I'll get to in a second. This prevents the possible problem of a client trying to set two scripts active at the same time. So that, this new argument allows this to be an atomic action. Question here, is there any other additional properties we see of value that might go in this object? One idea that came to mind as I was implementing this was, do we need to know if a particular script is included by another one? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that or not. Hearing none, I guess we'll go to the next slide. Okay, changes to the set method. So as mentioned just a second ago, we've added a new onSuccess activate script argument, which is used to set, change, or unset the active script. This only gets acted upon if all of the creates, updates, and destroys succeed. Additionally, any changes made to any of the objects by this action must be reported in the set response. So if you created a script and activated at the same time, obviously that's going to be reported as created. But if you are doing something which activates a new script, but at the same time deactivates another one, the deactivated script would also appear as being updated in the response. Additionally, this argument can be used even if you're not creating, updating, or destroying anything. So if you just want to flip a particular script on or off, this argument can be used with create, update, and destroy being null. Next slide, please. Also added a new query method, pretty straightforward. You can filter and sort based on the name or the active properties. Again, question here for the group. Do we see the need for any other additional filter or sort criteria?
That seems pretty comprehensive. Everything else would be unlikely to be used in pretty much all cases.
Yeah, the only issue that I thought might pop up is if you're, if you want to clear out any inactive scripts, do you want to know if any of those are being included by the one that it actually is active?
It's still a property you can fetch on all your scripts, presumably. So it's more valuable to be able to fetch a property and then have a change since rather than a query, possibly.
Right, so you're making an argument to have a property on the object itself. It says that you're being included by somebody.
Even that's kind of tricky, isn't it? Do you just resolve it client side? I'd say it's probably better to not overcomplicate this too much.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, like, now that you mentioned is included, I want it as a client writer, right?
I'm sorry, Lexi, can you repeat that?
Now that you mentioned is included, I want it. I want to use it now.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I can, for certain type of client, I suppose, yeah. Happy to do it much later or in a separate spec or whatever, but yeah, don't ask open-ended questions because the answer is always going to be yes.
Okay, next slide, please. And so here, this is the biggest addition since IETF 108. We've added a new test method. The request looks as you see there. Obviously, there's an account ID. The client specifies the script either with script content, which is just the raw octets, or an ID in an existing script that's already on the server. Also gives an array of email blob IDs of messages that it wants to test against. We've reused the envelope object from the mail spec to pass the interpreter information that it should assume was present in the SMTP transaction that delivered the message. This can be used for obviously envelope tests or vacation actions. There's also a UTC date which specifies if and when the interpreter may have sent a vacation response to a particular user. And again, another open-ended question for Alexi, I guess. Do we need any additional arguments for this thing? I don't know how well adopted the environment spec is or the duplicate spec, but
can you remind me in the environment?
I'm sorry, Alexi?
Can you remind me what's in the environment?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now. One of them is where is the interpreter actually running? Is it on
delivery, IMAP, all of this?
Yeah, I don't recall what the other ones are. Again, I don't know how widespread that spec is. Obviously, we could always extend this spec if there was a need for this kind of things. You know, the duplicate, you know, basically just checks to see if the message already exists. You know, this could be a fairly simple, you know, Boolean type argument for testing. You know, just say yes or no whether that you're supposed to, you know, act as if this has been already delivered or not. But not hearing any strong opinions, I might just leave this as is, and this could always be extended down the road if we feel the need.
Sounds good.
Okay, next slide, please. So to reply to this thing, you need to go forward one, Brian. So to reply to this, in addition to the account ID, basically has two other arguments, completed or not completed. both of which are arrays. If it's completed, it's a map of the blob ID to a set of action types. The action type kind of mimics what we see with the array of method requests. So it's an array, it's a tuple, it's an array that has the name of the script, the civ action, and then an object containing all the arguments. If the test fails, you'll get a map of the blob ID of the message and any set error that identifies what the problem was. On the next slide, I've got an example of what one of these action objects looks like. Pretty straightforward. So this would be a vacation action and the various arguments that you might see. The current draft has a bunch of text which describes how the arguments should get named. Mainly, it usually either uses the tagged argument name for those that are tagged arguments. For those that are positional, it uses the name that is in the actual usage part of the spec. Next slide. One question on the format of the reply as I was implementing this, FCC itself has its own, obviously, argument value, but then a bunch of other arguments that can go along with it. So in addition to FCC, you could have create and special use and mailbox ID and a bunch of other ones that could possibly go along with it. So my question was, should FCC basically be its own sub-object with any appropriate arguments alongside of it, or just leave them in line as individual arguments? The question was, do we need any
wouldn't do I wouldn't do FCC as a special object, just for generality of things.
Okay, that's fine.
And besides, I don't think Civ really allows parameters to parameters. So realistically, they're sort of related, but they have to be interpretable even if they are not with FCC. So you still have to handle this.
Yes, you're correct. That Civ prohibits arguments to arguments. So yeah, I'm fine leaving it the way it is. It's less implementation work and less text for me, anyways. The other question is for this test method, which actually is optional. Do we need any kind of limits, whether it be rate limits or other types of limits? Ron, I think you were the original one that proposed the idea of a rate limit for this.
There's already a rate limited error message for set error. So I would just say that we can use that. You can say rate limit and reject a request if it's given and it hits your rate limit. Or you can do an HTTP level rate limiting response as well. I don't think probably the server needs to say what its limit is.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do you think we need text stating that there may or may not be rate limit, or just leave it as is and let the implementation decide?
Specify that rate limit can be one of the error messages that can be returned, which I think is a general thing anyway.
Fair enough.
So is the concern that people will just continuously use test just to...
Yeah, do something ridiculous like run a test for every single message in their mailbox, one after the other, and hammer the server.
I see.
Any other questions or comments on this?
I had a question a few slides back, and since I have the remote control and I can just do it,
Sure.
Email blob IDs allows you to specify multiple blobs, but the envelope is presumed to be the same for every single one of those email blobs with this
That
structure.
was the
Is that
assumption.
correct?
Yeah. That was the assumption. Yes.
I think that's fine, because you can always, if that's not true, you can always do multiple
requests,
test requests,
Yes.
even within a single set of method calls. So it's very easy to structure around that. Cool.
Yeah, I did not put an example of that in the draft, but there are there's a set of examples showing how the onSuccess activate script works in various scenarios. So please check the draft and see if there's anything there, any use cases that people could imagine that wouldn't be covered by the current object. Any other comments, questions, suggestions before we move on? For what it's worth, what's documented in the 02 draft is currently implemented in Cyrus IMAP, and we're working towards the client side of this, which looks like it should be fairly straightforward. All right, I guess we're done, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thank you. All right. I guess I need to talk about my blob draft. Has anyone had a chance to read it yet?
I have.
Yeah.
Cool. Any comments about the direction it's going? Is that a sensible thing? I guess I'm going to have to do a call for adoption as well, or ask Jim to do a call for adoption since it's my document. I uploaded a new version of it.
I think it's pretty sensible. So I was just looking at the diff just before the session, and you added example of creation in the section about deletions.
Did I?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I'll probably put it after destroy because I did update destroy. I need to probably do another subtitle, for example. Yep, that makes sense.
Fine. I was just like, I mean, it's not the wrong example. It's just the section is wrong, sort of seems.
Yeah. Cool. I probably should do an example of it being used immediately afterwards as well, so show it being used inline. I guess the only question I had was whether I should add some kind of boolean here to say ephemeral yes, no. So say don't save this beyond this current set of method calls. I don't know if that's necessary or not to tell the server to put it in temporary storage because the server can probably choose to do that anyway. You would generally use these for fairly small things, so it's not going to use much space either way. All right.
The one question I had, Bron, on the get method is, are we just going to have it return the raw octets, or are we going to have it return something that resembles an object of its particular type?
So there's no ability to say get as raw octets. Your choices are data as text, as base 64, or as hex. As text will only work if it's text data. Otherwise, you need to do as base 64 or as hex, and you'll get the bytes in that format.
Okay, fair enough.
So, yeah, because you can't guaranteed round trip, and presumably you'll get an error object if you try and fetch a blob that is not fetchable as text, and you ask for the as text value. There's certainly need to do some more words around that, around the ways in which this could fetch incorrectly. All right, I will keep working on that, and I'll ask Jim to do a call for adoption since I'm the author. Thanks, Jim.
Looking at your examples, I was just finally wondering if there is a need for as quoted printable, but that's probably overkill.
I think it's unlikely that you'd get something where quoted printable makes sense rather than just getting the plain text. It is unlikely to be a format that a blob is going to be in that you would want to get. I guess if it was sourced as quoted printable and you wanted to save re-encoding it, but it's kind of odd. So I had the open question about range operators. I think that's useful because it's something that can be used. One of the things in here that maybe wasn't particularly clear in how I talked about it was that I thought it would be worth doing a catenate operator basically in this, that you could create a blob as a catenation of the following ranges out of the following blob IDs, and you could use it to implement the same thing that the catenate operator does as a server-side blob creation.
Yeah, it did make sense.
Cool. The next thing I want to look at, and either include in this document or possibly another document, I'm thinking ahead to JMAP files here, is look at the Rdif protocol and see whether you would be able to request some Rdif data about a blob and then provide an operator that said, from this blob ID and this blob ID and this set of Rdif information and these bits of data, generate a new blob, please. So that you could implement a file synchronization protocol on top of this. But that's probably too advanced for this spec.
Regarding blob get, so it looks like the properties argument is mandatory then for blob get, right? So you wouldn't want by default return the data in all available representations.
Yeah, you'd probably default to returning data as text if it's plain text and data as base64 if it's not, but that does seem a little, it's easier just to make it mandatory, hey?
Yeah, I think it makes sense if the client specifies what they can handle.
Yeah. All right. And the final topic for discussion in this meeting was JMAP for data transfer. We had a request during the CalConnect meeting from the Ordriga people who are working on a export format for personal information from many different things. So we have JS Calendar and JS Contact underway already for calendars and contacts. Fastmail has a basic spec for notes and storage node, which is for files. So just exporting as a zip file or some kind of directory containing files is probably going to be more useful there. There are other data types that people think we should be working on in this group, or that there's a, I guess, a request for a spec for or proposed specs for.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, so we're interested in tasks as well, but I already saw that in JS Calendar there is some kind of task included, but it's not, there's no JMAP for tasks yet. So that's something we are currently looking into. Yeah. So basically we look if where we could contribute to JMAP, which is a bit unclear to us until now, but I guess we can talk about this later on.
Presuming you're just looking for the data format for export purposes, it's JS Calendar that you want there anyway, rather than JMAP, really. So I think that has tasks. Does that make sense? Because the JMAP is the synchronization layer, and for mail that on some other things that does define data types too, but the contacts and calendars, the data types are actually defined in the JS Calendar, JS Contact spec.
Yeah. Yeah. We are, in the end, we want to have something, what would be best would be to have something like a protocol, not only the data type, but the protocol as well. So yeah, it's still, we're still figuring out where a good place for us would be to, I don't know, fill in some gaps also.
Yeah, this is definitely the right working group for it. So I guess the question is whether we need a different format than JMAP calendars for JMAP tasks specifically that ships still JS calendar objects, but as a tasks rather than calendars thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So you didn't yet settle on using JS calendar for a future JMAP for tasks protocol?
No, it would be, I think. Yes, it's just, it would be, the JMAP protocol would be separate. It would be a separate JMAP spec and separate, but it'd be using that data format. So the JMAP bit would actually be fairly straightforward. It's mainly just referencing the data type.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll do that fairly soon then.
Sounds good.
We probably could, yeah.
Yeah. Robert.
Yeah.
for tasks, I think on the JMAP part, the interesting part will be defining an address book type, like what we have for JMAP calendars as a calendars type. This might most likely be different for tasks. Oh, sorry, I was thinking about context now. But for tasks also, what is the bucket where a task should be part of, and that might differ from a calendar. Yeah. Sorry, I was confused about that.
That would be in the JMAP task spec, a task list or something like that, I suspect.
Yes.
That's like some question I had. So you have this JS group object as well in JS calendar. Why don't you use it in JMAP for calendar?
Because it's it wouldn't be very efficient. It's just one big collection of items, whereas JMAP gives you a way of much more efficiently querying, so you just get just the data you need and getting updates to that in an efficient way. So the JS group is more for publication, when you're just pushing out a file and that's it, it'll be gone. Someone will just take it up. Whereas when you're using it for JMAP, we have something a bit more sophisticated.
Okay, thanks.
We have about 10 minutes left. The final thing on my agenda is the milestones. Does anyone have anything else we want to talk about before we get to those? Guess not. All right, so back one more. The milestones we have at the moment are lots of stuff. Submit JMAP quotas to IESG, that's still pending, and JMAP SMIME is still pending as well. Alexi's going to get back to that at some point, but has been busy with IMAP 402. Blobs, we'll do the call for adoption soon. JMAP Civ, we've adopted. SMIME key management will push further back. Alexi, when do you think we'll get to the rest of the SMIME stuff?
Spring.
Spring, cool. All right, that's November here in Australia. Spring, so next year. No, okay. 6 months or so, 4 months, something like that. Cool. I will do that.
More than, well, especially if IMAP 4F2 is done, which I really hope that we can get our ADs to actually do something about. So
I'll say April next year. Yeah,
that sounds about right.
Cool. The blobs work will be pushed back a little bit because I've been slow on getting it to here. Submit a document with guidance for implementers of IMAP servers and proxies informational. We've punted this out to December 2020. We've punted it a couple of times. We still do need to do that. I guess you and I will sit down and do that at some stage, Neil. One of these happy days. JS Contact. When do we think that will be ready to go, Robert?
I can't hear you anymore, Bron, but yeah, I guess 4 to 6 months is also a good time frame.
Cool. And finally, JMAP Civ.
As far as I'm concerned, it's fairly close. Pending reviews. I think other than you, Bron, and Alexi, I'm not sure who else has actually read it at this point.
I guess let's do a last call once we've switched it on at Fastmail and had some implementation experience with it.
Fair enough.
Cool. So that timeline of December still looks reasonable. In that case, we'll do a last call in a couple of weeks. Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. Do we have anything else to do before we pack it in? All right, appreciate all your time. See you all in 4 months in virtual Prague, or possibly at an interim CalConnect in between, since we tend to do a session for JMAP as well. Anything else? No? All right, thanks, Jim. Thanks for taking notes.
Take care.
See you next time, everybody.
Murray, it looks like you just appeared. We just adjourned.